So you may have heard the words real estate syndication, a syndicator, and whether you want to get involved in a syndication, invest in one. You may have some questions about what exactly is a real estate syndication and what are some of the common terms that you might hear. So I'm going to go through some of those and explain what they are. So the first question usually is, well, what exactly is a syndication or syndicator? It's just a word that usually in the real estate context means a group of investors that pool their money to put towards a real estate acquisition, buying a property, developing it, rehab, whatever it is. And they go out and they get a loan for part of the money that they need. The rest of it, they syndicate by going out to investors or investor groups and bringing in cash equity investors into the deal. And that's basically a syndication. So some of the common terms that you'll hear in a syndication that are somewhat interchangeable is sponsor, GP, manager, and GP just stands for general partner. Sometimes the structure isn't always a limited partnership where there is a general partner. It could be an LLC, but usually people still use the word GP to represent the person who set the deal up and usually is going to manage and operate how the company works, how it's developed. Even if they hire a property manager, they're still going to manage and oversee the investment, basically. So this is the person who puts the deal together. They're going to get usually a promote, carried interest, split. They're common, similar terms that just mean I put the deal together. It was my work and I found the deal. So I get compensated by a percentage of profit, and that's their promote, split, carried interest, whatever the term is that they use. An LP is a limited partner, and those are your investors. So even if you only have a limited liability company set up where there's no technical LP or limited partner, people still use the term LP to refer to cash investors who are usually basically investors that don't have a lot of management rights. They're just entitled to some profits and they're more passive. Reg D, 506, you might hear some of these terms. And this is basically when you do an offering of a security, which when you sell an investment to investors, a lot of times it's covered by securities law. And this is an exemption that allows the sponsor to make this offering to investors without having to register the securities with the SEC. And so Reg D and Rule 506 are the most common that people use to go out and raise money. The offering, basically that means just the offering of stock, units, membership interests. It's the investment that they're offering to you. And that's what they consider the offering. So you invest in their offering. PPM is a private placement memorandum. This is an offering document, offering memorandum, similar term. It's a long disclosure document that tells you who the company is, who the management is, what the investment is, what their plan, sort of a business plan, exit strategy, and just an overall view of the investment and all the risks involved. So here are some of the risks of investing in this, and those are going to be in a PPM or private placement memorandum. Operating agreement, OA, there's a number of different names for it, company agreement, limited liability company agreement. If it's structured as a limited partnership, it could be an LP or limited partnership agreement. And this is basically a contract that governs your investment. So you become an owner, either a member or an LP, in the entity that they set up, and that entity usually owns the property, and you become an owner or partial owner of that entity. And the operating agreement or partnership agreement dictate what your rights are, what your remedies are if something goes wrong, how you get paid and get your investment back. So it's essentially a contract between you and all the other owners. The subscription agreement is a formal contract that says, hey, I'm buying membership interests, units, common stock, whatever it is that's being offered. I'm going to subscribe or purchase those units, membership interests, whatever it is. And so the term is subscribe. And so it's a subscription agreement, and that's your investment document. An investor questionnaire, you might be asked to fill out a questionnaire. This usually comes down to determining your level of sophistication in investments and whether you qualify as an accredited investor or not, which I'll cover in a little bit what that means. And so it's usually something you have to fill out to help the company that's basically issuing or doing the offering, which is called the issuer, the company making the offering, helping the issuer determine if you're an accredited investor. A waterfall is the profit distribution, and that can be in different levels. They call it a waterfall because it hits this part first, pays this percentage out, and then it goes down and pays the next percentage, goes down, and it pays the next percentage to the other people. So maybe the investors get paid back first, then the waterfall goes down, and then it pays out the sponsor their compensation for putting the deal together. So there's all kinds of levels of complexity in a waterfall. And the waterfall is going to be contained in usually in the PPM and the operating agreement. It'll explain it. So what is a pref, or a preferred return? So it's used in a couple different contexts, but a pref is usually a preferred return that's being paid out, whether it's to a larger investor or it's a preferred return, like an 8% preferred return on your money. That's typically what's considered a pref. And it's usually paid out first before all other money. A JV is a joint venture. This is just, a generalized term that can apply to a lot of different things. Usually in this context, a JV is a JV partner. That's somebody that's a large equity provider that's coming in, and there'll be a joint venture agreement that dictates their investment. An SPE, that's a single or special purpose entity. And this is an entity that owns the property directly. And it's a little complicated to explain very much, but it's usually to protect the lender, but SPE is a special purpose entity. A TIC or a 1031, they're used in a similar structure. The tenants in common is the structure of how the property is owned when people with 1031 or tax deferred proceeds come into a deal, and maybe they're sold another property and they're bringing in 1031 proceeds. It'll be done through a TIC. Capitalization and capital contribution. So capitalization is the ownership structure and like percentage of ownership that somebody might own. And then a capital contribution is, in order to get that percentage ownership, how much are you contributing? How much money are you putting in? That's your capital contribution. A capital event or an exit or refinance can sometimes be considered a capital event or an exit. So at the end of the real estate deal, usually they're going to sell the property, and that's usually the typical exit, and a capital event when they sell the property. Sometimes the capital event could be a refinance. They refinance out of the property, pay back all the investors, and so that's technically the exit for the investor. Allocations and capital account. This has to do with taxes. It gets a little complicated, but usually these provisions will be in the operating agreement or partnership agreement. And it says how profit and loss is allocated for tax purposes. And a capital account is something that's set up for tax purposes. It's not a separate bank account or anything. It's just on books, on the records, showing that you have a capital account, usually contains whatever amount you put in, less what they've paid you back as a return of your capital. There are certain fees involved in a syndication. Usually you'll see things like an acquisition fee. That's something that gets paid out to the sponsor or someone related to the sponsor based on the purchase price of the property. There's other things like asset management fee that might get charged, a development fee, a property management fee. These are all different types of fee that either the manager, the one who set it up, or someone that they hire is getting paid, and they have to disclose these fees to you so you know what's being deducted out of your potential return. Securities is essentially an investment, and securities is a broad term that covers things like stock, membership interests in an LLC, units. Those are all securities. So an offering is an offering of securities. Your return, IRR, ROI, return on investment, internal rate of return. There's different ways of calculating what return you might get as you're on your investment. So depending on how much financial detail they're providing, they'll usually tell you what the targeted IRR or internal rate of return is. So that's something to look for in their presentation and how they calculate it. One of the biggest terms when it comes to securities offerings is whether someone's accredited. Under Reg D, which I mentioned, Rule 506 and 501 is where they define the term accredited. You have to bring in either accredited or sophisticated investors in most private placements, which is your typical real estate syndication. And when you fill out the investor questionnaire, you have to notify people if you are accredited or not accredited. And that helps the issuer determine if they can allow you to be part of the offering. So accredited is usually a higher level of sophistication in investment, but there's about 14 definitions in Rule 501. The most common ones people look at is individual with over $1 million net worth, not including their home, or $200,000 in income over the last 2 years for an individual, or over $300,000 in income for the last 2 years for a couple. So those are the most common ones. There's quite a few others, but that's what most people look at. And then also, if you're not accredited, in some cases, you can still be allowed into an offering and real estate syndication. If you're not accredited, but you rise to the level of what's considered sophisticated, there's no set definition for that. It's basically you have a level of sophistication in investing and understanding and evaluating the investment to protect your own interests. So these are just some of the more common terms that are used in a real estate syndication.